What if I told you that some men never truly grow up, not in body but in mind? They remain trapped in a cycle of dreams, fantasies and avoidance, a child in a man's body. Carl Jung called it the Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy, and for many, it's a fate they never escape. But why does this happen? And more importantly, can you break free? Carl Jung saw patterns in human psychology, universal themes that played out in myths, legends and real lives. One of these patterns is the Puer Aeternus, Latin for eternal boy. It's an archetype, a psychological blueprint, describing men who refuse to embrace the responsibilities of adulthood. They drift, caught between boundless potential and an unwillingness to commit to anything concrete. But where does this pattern come from? Is it shaped in childhood, or is it hardwired into some men from birth? Psychologists suggest that the roots of the puer are planted early. Some develop this mindset because they were overprotected as children, shielded from struggle and consequence. Without ever being forced to handle responsibility, they subconsciously reject it as adults. Others were neglected or emotionally unsupported, and so they escape into fantasies, grand visions of what they will become, rather than the difficult path to actually becoming it. And then there are those for whom the puer is not a product of trauma or protection, but simply a natural disposition. Some men are drawn to novelty, adventure, and unrestricted movement, not because they are broken, but because their psychology inclines them towards seeking rather than settling. The mistake is not in having these tendencies, but in allowing them to dominate a life without ever anchoring them to reality. The puer thrives on freedom. He avoids routine, despises authority, and shuns anything that ties him down. He lives for possibilities but never chooses a path. He is Icarus, soaring high on wings of ambition, but doomed to fall because he lacks the discipline to maintain his flight. Icarus had the courage to dream, but without restraint his dream destroyed him. The myth is not just a warning about arrogance, it is a lesson in balance. The man who soars too high without caution burns out. The man who never takes flight never lives. The Puer Aeternus is caught in this limbo. But is the pure always a negative archetype? The answer is no. The tragedy is not that the pure lacks potential. The tragedy is that he doesn't know how to direct it. The pure is capable of greatness, if only he could accept the weight of the real world, and this is where the real question emerges. Can a man be responsible and still embody pure energy? The answer is yes, if it is balanced. The best artists, entrepreneurs and innovators all carry a streak of puer within them. The curiosity that drives them, the risk-taking that allows them to break boundaries, the imagination that fuels their creations. These are all puer qualities, but when untethered from discipline, they lead nowhere. When fused with structure, they create history. A man must ask himself whether his pure nature is a source of energy or an excuse for avoidance. If it fuels creativity, ambition and vision while being balanced with responsibility, it is a gift. If it is used to delay commitments and reject struggle, it is a slow poison. And this is where modern life makes things even more complicated. Today, the world does not demand men to grow up the way it once did. In the past, a boy became a man because he had no other choice. At 13, he would be expected to contribute to his family's survival. At 16, he might take up arms for his people. By 18, he was a fully recognized adult. But today, a man can reach 30, 40, even 50, and still be living the same life as he did in his early 20s. No deep relationships, no mastery of any craft, no enduring purpose, just an endless cycle of avoidance floating from one fleeting passion to another. This is not entirely his fault. Society has changed. Economic conditions have shifted. Rites of passage have disappeared. Higher education has extended adolescence. Careers demand more preparation. The cost of living is higher. These factors all contribute to the delay of adulthood. But here's the truth. While these external forces exist, they do not change the internal responsibility every man has to take charge of his own life. Some men make the transition into responsibility naturally without needing a push. Why? What makes one man escape puer energy while another remains stuck? For some, it is a life event, a personal failure, the birth of a child, the loss of a loved one that forces them forward. For others, it is exposure to mentors, role models, or simply an internal drive that compels them to step up. And yet some men remain in pure energy forever, despite these same experiences. The difference is not what happens to them, but what they choose to do with it. Some men take hardship as a wake-up call. Others take it as proof that life is unfair, retreating further into fantasy. And this is where the real danger of pure energy lies, not in the desire for freedom, but in the refusal to integrate responsibility. Time alone does not fix this. Maturity is not an automatic process. A man does not become responsible simply because the years pass. The longer he remains in the pure state, the harder it becomes to leave. If he refuses to integrate, if he continues to drift, then he will wake up one day and find that he has waited too long. The mistake is believing that rejecting responsibility preserves freedom. It does not. A man who avoids responsibility is not free. He is controlled by his impulses, by his circumstances, by the people and systems that shape his reality. True freedom does not come from avoiding responsibility. It comes from embracing it. Because the man who owns his responsibilities, who steps fully into the weight of life, is the man who has the power to shape his world rather than being shaped by it. The Puer Aeternus is not just a phase, it is a challenge. A man can remain trapped in endless potential, or he can integrate it into something real. One path leads to endless waiting, the other leads to mastery, fulfillment, and the life that was waiting for him all along. The answer is not to reject youth. The answer is to integrate it, to take its energy, its passion, and fuse it with discipline and purpose. The man who does this does not lose his fire, he forges it into something unstoppable. And that leaves one final question: which man will you be? For most of history, adulthood wasn't a choice. Boys became men because they had to. Their families depended on them, their communities demanded it, their survival required it. There was no period of extended adolescence, no time to find themselves, no illusion that they had decades to wait before stepping into responsibility. They worked, they fought, they built, their hands were calloused, their backs burdened, and yet they carried those burdens because there was no other path. But today that moment of transformation never comes. There's no battle to win, no test to pass, no defining event that forces a shift from boyhood to manhood. Instead, there is comfort, endless, suffocating comfort. Modern society has removed every obstacle to survival. Food is abundant, shelter is guaranteed, entertainment is limitless, and as a result, many men have lost the urgency to grow, to struggle, to become something more than they are. Technology has made everything easier, but it has also made many men weaker. In a world where you can order food from your phone, work from your laptop, and escape into an alternate reality at the press of a button, the incentives to push forward, to challenge yourself, to build discipline, to embrace responsibility, are fading. Why fight when the world asks nothing of you? Why struggle when you can distract yourself indefinitely? But here's the paradox. Comfort does not create happiness. It creates stagnation. The Puer Aeternus thrives in this environment because there is no pressure to evolve, no necessity to break free. Video games provide the thrill of achievement without real effort. Social media offers validation without substance. Dating apps deliver intimacy without commitment. Everything is accessible instantly without sacrifice. Dopamine, the brain's reward chemical, is the biological mechanism that keeps the poor trapped. Every notification, every level up, every quick burst of pleasure reinforces the habit of seeking instant gratification. Research on dopamine pathways has shown that excessive reliance on digital entertainment, pornography, and social media not only shortens attention spans, but physically alters the brain's ability to engage in sustained, meaningful work. The modern world has hijacked the reward system that once motivated men to hunt, to build, to fight, and has replaced it with a cheap, low-effort simulation of success. The mind is tricked into believing it has achieved something, but in reality nothing has changed. But modern life isn't just making men complacent, it's making them chemically dependent on avoidance. The brain is wired to seek dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure and reward, and the modern world offers endless sources of artificial dopamine spikes, conditioning men to seek pleasure without effort. Studies on prolonged adolescence have shown that men who spend excessive time in digital escapism, whether through video games, pornography, or endless scrolling, are less likely to pursue long-term goals, maintain stable relationships, or develop the grit required for real success. The brain becomes addicted to instant rewards, making the slow, difficult work of building a life seem unbearable by comparison. Why read when you can watch? Why date when you can swipe? Why build something lasting when a temporary escape is only seconds away? But here's where the damage is even worse. The modern Puer does not realize that he is in a trap. He feels restless. He feels dissatisfied. He feels as though something is missing. But he does not connect his own stagnation to his pursuit of comfort. He believes the answer is more pleasure, not more struggle, and so he seeks another distraction, another escape, another way to fill the growing void inside him. He tells himself that he is fine, that this is normal, that he still has time, but deep down he knows the truth. This is not just about individual failure. It is about a societal shift that has stripped men of the very things that once made them strong. The delay of adulthood is not simply a personal choice. It is an economic and cultural phenomenon. In the past, men entered the workforce young, married early, and built families before their 20s were over. Today, many men are still in school or living with their parents, well into their late 20s or 30s, with no clear transition into independence. Economic factors, rising costs of living, increased academic demands, a shifting job market have extended adolescence beyond anything history has ever seen. But here's the question no one asks. Does prolonged adolescence truly make men weaker? Or does it just change how they express strength? Some argue that modern advancements allow men to develop new forms of mastery. Digital entrepreneurship, creative innovation, and intellectual pursuits are now as valuable as physical labor once was. And yet, while the ways men engage with the world may have changed, one thing remains constant. Maturity requires discipline. Regardless of the era, the man who lacks discipline will always remain trapped in potential, forever waiting for the right moment to step into responsibility. But there's another, deeper reason men struggle to grow up today. Modern culture glorifies youth but does not celebrate maturity. In ancient societies, rites of passage marked the transition from boyhood to manhood. Spartan boys endured the agoge, a brutal training system that forged warriors through hardship. Native American tribes had vision quests, where young men isolated themselves in the wilderness, facing their fears to receive a vision of their path. In medieval Europe, boys became apprentices, thrust into the working world early, learning discipline, responsibility, and mastery. These rites made the transition to adulthood unavoidable. They tested young men, forcing them to develop resilience, independence, and a sense of purpose. But today, there is no clear initiation into manhood, no threshold to cross, no elders guiding the young toward responsibility. A man can drift in adolescence for years, decades even, without ever being forced to step up. And so, many never do. But here's the most uncomfortable truth of all. The longer a man waits to take responsibility for his life, the harder it becomes. Stagnation is not a pause, it is a slow decay. The habits a man builds in his 20s define his 30s. The patterns of his 30s shape his 40s. And before he knows it, the decades have slipped by. And the man who once had all the potential in the world wakes up in a life he never meant to live. There is a reason older men warn younger ones about wasted time. There is a reason they tell them to act before it's too late. It's because they know what it means to wait too long. A man does not need to reject comfort entirely, but he must recognize when it has become his prison. He must ask himself, am I choosing my life or am I just avoiding discomfort? Am I growing or am I distracting myself from the fact that I am not? Because the difference between those who remain Puers and those who escape is not intelligence, it is not talent, it is not luck. It is simply this, whether they were willing to step into discomfort before it was too late. The Puer Aeternus will always whisper, there's still time. It will always promise that tomorrow is an option. But tomorrow becomes next week, next month, next year, and soon a lifetime has passed. And this is where a man must make a decision. He must choose between two paths. The first is the path of comfort, the familiar, the safe, the predictable. It is the path of least resistance. It is easy, but it leads nowhere. It is a slow descent into mediocrity, into a life of regret. The man who chooses this path may avoid hardship, but he also avoids greatness. The second path is the hero's journey. It is uncertain, it is difficult, it requires sacrifice, but it is the only path that leads to true transformation, to mastery, to meaning. The modern world has made it easier than ever to stay a child forever. The question is, are you willing to reject the lie of comfort before it's too late? Behind every lost boy there is often an absent or emotionally distant father. It is one of the most overlooked wounds in modern psychology, the father wound. It's invisible, but its effects last a lifetime. A man does not simply wake up one day and decide to reject responsibility. The roots of this mindset go deep, often back to childhood, back to the father he had, or the father he never truly knew. Carl Jung understood the profound influence of the father on a man's psyche. A strong father figure provides structure, discipline, and a model of what it means to be an adult. He is the one who teaches his son how to handle responsibility, how to regulate emotions, how to channel aggression productively rather than destructively. Without this guidance, a boy struggles to define himself as a man. He either resists growing up entirely or swings to the opposite extreme, adopting hypermasculinity in an attempt to prove something to himself and the world. But what happens when that figure is missing, weak, or destructive? What happens when a boy never sees what mature masculinity looks like? It creates a void, an emptiness that the boy spends his life trying to fill, often in ways that sabotage him. Some chase validation through success, never feeling worthy no matter how much they achieve. Others seek approval in relationships, desperately looking for someone to affirm them in ways their father never did. And many, many others retreat into passivity, avoiding the pain altogether by distracting themselves with entertainment, fleeting pleasures, and an endless search for meaning that never materializes. The father wound manifests in different ways. Some men had fathers who were physically absent through divorce, abandonment, or death. Others had fathers who were present but emotionally unavailable, indifferent, or hypercritical. Some were raised by overly protective parents, never given the space to develop independence, and some had fathers who were too controlling, who suffocated their autonomy and left them afraid to make decisions on their own. The wound takes many forms, but the result is often the same. A man who either fears responsibility or resents authority, a man who either avoids leadership or abuses power, a man who either remains passive or becomes overly aggressive. This wound cuts deeper than most realize. The absence of a strong father figure often means a man never internalizes an inner father, a voice inside him that guides him toward discipline, perseverance, and self-respect. Instead, he grows up with a void where that guidance should be, and so he either looks for external replacements or stumbles through life without direction. This is why so many men idolize strong male figures, warriors, athletes, business moguls, even fictional characters. They're searching for the father they never had. And this is where modern society has failed. For centuries, male mentorship was built into cultures. Fathers, uncles, elders, and community leaders guided young men through rites of passage, showing them what it meant to be responsible, to provide, to lead. But today that structure is gone. Boys are left to figure it out on their own, or worse. They are told that masculinity itself is the problem, that strength is oppression, that leadership is toxic, that ambition is greed. But what about the men who had good fathers, yet still struggle with pure tendencies? Not every Puer is the result of an absent father. Some are shaped by other influences, societal conditioning, trauma, or even their own natural disposition. But even in these cases, the solution is often the same. The absence of strong male guidance leaves a gap, and that gap must be filled. But here's where many men go wrong. They believe that because they did not have a strong father, they are doomed to repeat his absence. They believe that they cannot learn what they were never taught. But this is a lie. History is filled with men who lacked guidance yet forged themselves into greatness. Men who sought out mentors, built their own discipline, created their own structure. The men who rise are not always the men who had the best fathers. They are the men who refuse to let the absence of one define them. The mistake is believing that father wounds heal on their own. They don't. They manifest in self-sabotage, in addictions, in avoidance. The man who does not face this wound is ruled by it. The man who refuses to acknowledge it will pass it on to his own sons. But can the father wound be repaired, and if so, how? The first step is awareness, acknowledging the impact of the wound instead of denying it. Too many men dismiss their experiences, telling themselves it doesn't matter, that they turned out fine, that the past is in the past. But repression does not erase trauma. It buries it, and what is buried remains in control. The second step is finding new mentors. If a father was absent, emotionally unavailable, or destructive, it does not mean a man must walk the path alone. The world is full of men who have walked this road before: coaches, teachers, business leaders, older friends. The key is to seek out strong male figures who embody discipline, wisdom, and integrity, and learn from them. A mentor does not have to replace a father, but he can offer what was missing: guidance, structure, and a vision of mature masculinity. The third step is building the inner father, developing self-discipline and internal authority. This means setting standards, enforcing boundaries, and becoming the kind of man a younger version of yourself would respect. It is the ability to tell yourself no when necessary, to delay gratification, to lead yourself even when no one is watching. The best fathers are not just external figures. They are voices that live inside the mind of a man, directing him towards strength and purpose. And this is where a critical realization must occur. The father wound is not just about receiving guidance, it is about becoming the guide. Many men believe they must heal before they can lead, before they can mentor others, before they can be fathers themselves. But healing is not something that happens before responsibility. Healing happens through responsibility. A man without a father may struggle to become a man, but a man who recognizes the wound and refuses to let it control him, he can become something far greater. He can become the father he never had. He can break the cycle. The final step is forgiveness, not necessarily for the father himself, but for oneself. Many men carry resentment, bitterness, or shame over what they did not receive, but dwelling in that resentment only keeps them bound to the past. Forgiveness is not about excusing neglect, it is about refusing to let it define the future. A boy who lacked a father may struggle to become a man, but a man who refuses to let the absence of his father dictate his destiny, he can become something extraordinary. He can stand in the gap, not just for himself, but for others. He can lead where no one led him. He can build what was never built for him. He can be the kind of man he always needed, and in doing so, he can ensure that the cycle does not continue. But first, he must make a choice. Will he remain a boy, searching for the father who was never there? Or will he step forward and become the man he was meant to be? Because the truth is, no one will do it for him. Most men never realize they're living in a Puer Aeternus state. It feels normal, comfortable, harmless. They go through the motions of life, convinced they still have time to figure things out. They tell themselves they're exploring their options, keeping their freedom, waiting for the right moment. But time keeps moving, and the moment never comes. A man in the pure state will rarely call himself immature. He doesn't see his mindset as a problem. Instead, he frames it as an advantage. He tells himself that he's adaptable, that he's refusing to settle, that he's different from the men who gave in to the burdens of adulthood. And in some ways, he's right. The pure energy is not inherently bad. It is the source of adventure, curiosity, and innovation. But when left unchecked, it leads to stagnation, avoidance, and wasted years. The tragedy of the Puer Aeternus is not just that he avoids responsibility, it is that deep down he knows he was meant for more. He knows he has wasted time. He knows that he has potential that remains unrealized. And this knowledge eats at him. The Puer may not admit he is stuck, but there are unmistakable signs. Patterns of thought and behavior that expose the reality beneath the illusion of freedom. The first and most obvious sign is fear of commitment. The Puer avoids long-term plans, responsibilities, and obligations. He dabbles in different careers but never settles into mastery. He jumps from one relationship to another, never staying long enough to build something lasting. He hesitates, afraid to choose, because choosing means letting go of all other possibilities. He tells himself he is keeping his options open, but in reality, he is simply afraid of what commitment represents. permanence, responsibility, the end of the illusion that he can be anything, do anything, at any time. A man who is truly free does not fear commitment because he understands that freedom is not about having infinite choices, but about making a choice and owning it. Then there's chronic indecisiveness. The Puer overthinks everything. He's stuck in analysis paralysis, always waiting for more information, a better opportunity, a sign that tells him what to do. He tells himself he's being careful, that he doesn't want to make the wrong choice, but by making no choice at all, he ensures failure by default. He lives in perpetual delay, convincing himself that he will act eventually, but eventually never comes. Another telltale sign is the idealization of youth. The Puer romanticizes his younger years, longing for the days when life felt simpler, when responsibility was someone else's burden. He dreads aging, not because he fears death, but because he fears irrelevance. He avoids responsibility under the guise of staying free-spirited. But in reality, he is clinging to a version of himself that no longer exists. He sees adulthood as the enemy, as the thing that will strip him of excitement and adventure. But this is a lie. The greatest men in history did not achieve their success by remaining boys. They achieved it by embracing the responsibility of creation, of leadership, of building something larger than themselves. Perhaps the most dangerous sign of all is escapism through fantasy. This could be addiction to video games, social media, pornography, or even just daydreaming about an idealized future without ever working toward it. The Puer finds solace in imaginary achievements because real ones require struggle. He convinces himself that he is learning, that he is preparing, that one day he will make his move. But preparation without execution is just another form of delay. He tells himself he is on the verge of something great, but years pass and nothing happens. But escapism isn't always obvious. Sometimes it masquerades as productivity. The Puer might consume endless self-improvement books, watch motivational videos, or make elaborate plans for the future without ever taking real action. He might pursue one hobby after another, dabbling in everything but mastering nothing. He might constantly change his goals, telling himself he is experimenting when in reality he is just avoiding failure. The Puer does not struggle with ambition, he struggles with execution. Then there's dependency on others. The Puer often relies heavily on family, friends, or partners for financial support, decision-making, or emotional reassurance. He avoids true self-sufficiency, preferring to let others bear the burdens of adulthood. Some Puers remain dependent on their parents well into adulthood, not because they lack intelligence or capability, but because they lack the internal drive to fully break free. Others shift this dependency onto romantic relationships, seeking a partner who will take care of them emotionally or financially, rather than standing on their own. And then there's the lack of deep, enduring purpose. The Puer drifts from one short-term goal to another, but never commits to a greater vision. He might say he wants to do something meaningful with his life, but he has no clear path to getting there. He may chase fleeting pleasures, new experiences, and temporary highs, but lacks the internal drive to build something lasting. He may have dreams, but he is unwilling to sacrifice for them, and so they remain just that, dreams. The greatest lie the Puer tells himself is that he still has time. He believes that the right moment will come, that one day things will align, and he will finally step into his full potential. But waiting is not a strategy, it is a slow decay. The habits a man builds in his 20s define his 30s. The patterns of his 30s shape his 40s, and before he knows it, the decades have slipped by, and the man who once had all the potential in the world wakes up in a life he never meant to live. There is a reason older men warn younger ones about wasted time. There's a reason they tell them to act before it's too late. It's because they know what it means to wait too long. So here's the question. Do you recognize these signs in yourself? And if you do, what are you going to do about it? Because understanding the problem is not the same as solving it. Awareness is the first step, action is the second, and action is where most men fail. The Puer Aeternus will always whisper, "There's still time." It will always promise that tomorrow is an option, but tomorrow becomes next week, next month, next year, and soon a lifetime has passed. A man must choose. He must either continue delaying, continue escaping, continue convincing himself that he is almost ready, or he must break the cycle, step into discomfort, and take responsibility for his own transformation. No one will force him. No one will push him forward. No one will make the choice for him. But if he does not act, he will spend his entire life wondering what could have been. And that is the greatest tragedy of all. Some men resist growing up because they believe adulthood means losing something vital. Their creativity, their passion, their sense of wonder. They see responsibility as a burden, as something that will drain them of life and turn them into just another cog in the machine. And in some cases, they are right. There is a version of adulthood that is lifeless, rigid, and devoid of joy. But Carl Jung understood that the answer is not to reject adulthood. The answer is to integrate both sides of the psyche, the pure and the senex. The Puer Aeternus is the eternal youth, the dreamer, the seeker, the adventurer. He thrives in possibility, in imagination, in the excitement of what could be. He despises limitation, discipline, and routine. He avoids commitment because he sees it as a trap rather than as the foundation for growth. When left unchecked, the pure becomes restless, unable to build anything lasting, forever in pursuit of the next new thing. He values spontaneity over structure, novelty over depth, and freedom over stability. He is like Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, intoxicated by pleasure, chaos, and the ever-changing nature of life. The senex, on the other hand, is the wise old man, the force of structure, stability, and responsibility. He values order, patience, and endurance. He is the builder, the planner, the one who turns dreams into reality. But when the senex dominates unchecked, he becomes rigid, resistant to change, fearful of the unknown. He suppresses spontaneity, kills creativity, and drowns in routine. He becomes a man who exists only to follow rules, who has lost the ability to adapt, who has become a prisoner of his own order. He is like Apollo, the god of logic and discipline, obsessed with control, predictability, and structure. Both archetypes are necessary, and yet most men become trapped in one or the other. The man lost in pure energy refuses to settle, forever running from responsibility, fearing that commitment will rob him of his soul. The man lost in senex energy suffocates himself in obligation, fearing that deviation from his routine will lead to chaos. One floats above life, never touching the ground. The other is buried beneath it, never looking up. The greatest men in history were not just pures, nor were they just senexes. They were both. They knew how to let the pure dream, but they also knew how to let the senex execute. They took the boundless energy of youth and combined it with the discipline of maturity. Leonardo da Vinci embodied the puer in his endless curiosity, his obsession with what could be, his refusal to be limited by convention. But his masterpieces, his inventions, his paintings, his anatomical studies only existed because he embraced the senex within himself, the discipline required to master his craft. He did not merely dream of innovation, he disciplined himself to bring it into reality. Steve Jobs was a visionary who imagined a world that didn't yet exist, but without the senex, without the structure of an organization, without the discipline of engineers and craftsmen, his ideas would have remained just that, ideas. His genius lay not just in his imagination, but in his ability to build, to structure, to execute. And this is where most men go wrong. They believe they must choose between these two energies. They assume that growing up means killing the pure, extinguishing the flame of curiosity and adventure in order to become responsible and disciplined. Or they assume that in order to keep their pure spirit alive, they must reject structure entirely, drifting through life without ever building anything lasting. But this is a false choice. A man must learn to channel the energy of the pure into something meaningful rather than letting it scatter into nothingness. He must cultivate the wisdom of the senex without allowing it to harden him into a lifeless machine. He must learn when to wander and when to commit, when to explore and when to build. The challenge is knowing how to integrate both forces without losing oneself in either. The key lies in deliberate structure with space for spontaneity. The pure thrives on possibility, but possibility without action leads nowhere. The senex thrives on stability, but stability without adaptability leads to stagnation. The balance between these two archetypes is where mastery is found. A man should set goals, create discipline, and hold himself accountable, but he should also leave room for creative chaos, for unplanned inspiration, for the moments where life demands flexibility. He should embrace routine but not let it imprison him. He should commit to something greater than himself, but not lose the ability to pivot when necessary. Modern society, however, does not encourage this balance. It pushes men toward extremes. It glorifies eternal youth, telling men that growing up means losing themselves. It offers endless distractions, seducing them with fleeting pleasures that keep them from ever taking responsibility. Or it demands total submission to order, forcing them into lifeless careers, rigid obligations, and a narrow existence where there is no room for imagination. The truth is, neither extreme leads to fulfillment. The answer is integration. The Puer must learn to respect discipline. The Senex must learn to respect creativity. And a man must learn to walk the line between both, knowing when to let go and when to hold firm. A man does not have to abandon his dreams to grow up. He does not have to sacrifice his curiosity, his passion, or his love for adventure, but he must root them in something real. He must build upon them, refine them, shape them into something that lasts. Otherwise, they will vanish into nothing. Like so many wasted years, so many unfulfilled ambitions, so many almosts. There is no true transformation without integration. The boy who refuses to embrace the Senex remains forever impotential. The man who rejects the Puer loses the very fire that makes life worth living. Balance is not something that happens by accident. It is a choice. The Puer will always whisper of freedom without responsibility. The Senex will always warn of danger, urging caution and order. The man who listens to only one will find himself either lost in potential or buried in routine. But the man who integrates both, he becomes something else entirely. He becomes the kind of man who does not merely dream of a better future, but builds one. He does not reject his past, nor does he become imprisoned by it. He takes what is best from both worlds, forging a path that is both disciplined and alive. And this is where a man must make a decision. He must choose whether to remain stuck in one extreme, forever drifting or forever rigid. Or he must do the harder thing, the thing that requires effort, the thing that requires self-awareness. He must become a man who walks the line between order and chaos, discipline and adventure, stability and creativity. Because the greatest men are not those who live in extremes. They are those who know how to stand at the center, mastering both. Every great story follows a pattern. A young man, comfortable in his world, is suddenly shaken. A challenge appears, one that forces him to leave behind the familiar, to step into the unknown. He faces trials, struggles, failures, he is broken down. But in the breaking, he learns, he grows, he transforms, and when he returns, he is no longer the boy who left. He is something more. Osiph Campbell called this the hero's journey, but it is not just mythology. It is the process of growth that every man must go through if he is to escape the Puer Aeternus. It is the journey from potential to mastery, from avoidance to action, from boyhood to manhood. And here's where most men fail. They refuse the call. They stay in comfort, they rationalize their inaction, they tell themselves they are not ready yet. They find distractions, excuses, and external factors to blame, but deep down they know they are avoiding something, and that avoidance is the prison they will live in for the rest of their lives. Every man will face the call to adventure. This call rarely comes in the form of something grand. It is not always a dramatic moment. More often, it is a whisper, a deep internal dissatisfaction with the way life is, a restlessness, a knowing, a sense that something must change. This is the first sign. The man who is meant for more feels it. The question is, does he answer it? Many do not. They resist, they justify, they find ways to numb the feeling. The distractions become stronger, the escapes more frequent. And yet the dissatisfaction never fully disappears. It lingers, it waits. And if ignored for too long, it turns into regret. The men who delay their journey for years, for decades, eventually look back and realize that the call never went away. They simply refused to listen. For those who accept the call, the next step is leaving the comfort zone. This is where most turn back. The journey is unknown, it is difficult. The first steps are always the hardest. The mind resists change. It clings to safety, to old habits, to the illusion that staying still is preferable to moving forward. But no hero's journey begins in a place of comfort. The tests come soon after, the ordeal, the struggle, the moment where a man is confronted with his weaknesses, his limitations, his deepest fears. And this is where the Puer usually fails. He is not used to struggle. He has spent his life avoiding pain, avoiding effort, avoiding responsibility, and so when the first real challenge comes, he looks for a way out. This is why most men never evolve. They attempt the journey, but at the first sign of resistance, they turn back. They convince themselves that they are not ready, that it is too difficult, that they will try again later, but later never comes. And the more times a man turns back, the harder it becomes to move forward again. But for those who persist, for those who refuse to turn back, there is a transformation waiting, the return with wisdom. This is where a man becomes something new. He has been tested, he has failed, he has faced his own weakness, and in doing so, he has built something real: character, discipline, strength. He is no longer ruled by fear, no longer a prisoner of comfort. He has become a man who is capable, who is responsible, who is no longer waiting for life to happen to him, but is actively shaping it himself. But here's the challenge. Most men do not have an external force pushing them into this journey. They live in a world that allows them to remain as they are. There is no rite of passage, no tribal elder to force them forward, no war, no hunt, no test of survival, and so the only way a man embarks on the journey is if he forces himself to. This is where self-initiation becomes necessary. The Puer does not become a man by accident. He does not wake up one day and simply feel ready. He must take action before he feels ready. He must seek discomfort before it is forced upon him. He must break himself down before life does it for him. There are no shortcuts to this, no easy way out. A man must confront the illusions he has built around himself. He must recognize that his distractions, his avoidance, his endless waiting are not preparation, they are chains, and those chains must be broken deliberately with effort. He must face discipline. Not the discipline imposed by external forces, but the discipline he creates for himself. He must set standards, enforce boundaries, and demand more of himself than anyone else ever will. He must do what is hard, not because someone else is making him, but because he refuses to be weak. He must embrace responsibility, not because he is forced to, but because he chooses to. Responsibility is not the end of freedom. It is the beginning of mastery. A man who takes full ownership of his life, who no longer blames others, who no longer waits for permission, that is a man who has stepped into true adulthood. He must endure failure, not as something to be feared, but as something to be learned from. The Puer avoids failure because it shatters his illusion of perfection. The man embraces it because he knows it is the only way to grow. He must seek challenge, hardship, and discomfort, not because he enjoys suffering, but because he knows that only through struggle is strength built. He must commit to something, to anything, to a craft, to a goal, to a mission that is greater than himself. The Puer drifts because he fears commitment, but commitment is not a loss of freedom, it is the forging of something real. A man who commits to nothing builds nothing, a man who builds nothing leaves nothing behind. And finally he must return, not just as a changed man, but as one who is ready to guide others. The hero's journey is not complete until he brings his wisdom back, until he becomes the mentor for those who are still lost. The boy becomes a man. The man becomes a leader. The leader creates the next generation. This is the cycle. This is how men are forged. And this is where a man must make a decision. He must choose between two paths. The first is the path of comfort, the familiar, the safe, the predictable. It is the path of least resistance. It is easy, but it leads nowhere. It is a slow descent into mediocrity, into a life of regret. The second path is the hero's journey. It is uncertain, it is difficult, it requires sacrifice. But it is the only path that leads to true transformation. The world will not force him to choose. No one will. He must choose for himself. And the choice he makes will define him. There is a lie that many men tell themselves, a quiet, comforting lie that whispers, "One day I'll figure it out." It is the belief that maturity will arrive on its own, that time will do the work for them, that if they wait long enough, something, anything, will change. But time does not turn boys into men. Struggle does, responsibility does, choice does. The Puer Aeternus does not disappear with age. He stays, buried beneath distractions. hidden under excuses, lingering in the background of every decision that is never made, and for many he remains for a lifetime. It is a tragedy so common that most never notice it. A man reaches 30, 40, 50, and finds himself in the same patterns he swore he would break, the same avoidance, the same unfinished ambitions, the same life of waiting, of drifting, of never truly arriving. But here is the truth. The world will not save you from this fate. Society is built to keep men comfortable in stagnation. It offers endless distractions, endless escapes, endless ways to fill the void with entertainment, pleasure, or the illusion of progress. It does not demand growth. It does not require sacrifice. And so many men remain exactly where they are, convincing themselves that they have time, that they are still figuring things out, that they are just waiting for the right moment. But waiting has a cost. The men who refuse to grow up do not just miss out on success, they miss out on meaning, on deep relationships, on the kind of fulfillment that can only come from pushing through struggle and building something real. The man who avoids responsibility believes he is keeping his freedom. In reality, he is losing it. Because a life without purpose, without discipline, without commitment is not freedom. It is bondage to one's own worst instincts. Carl Jung understood this. He saw that the Puer is not just an inconvenience, it is the shadow side of masculinity, the refusal to step into manhood, the eternal postponement of responsibility, the avoidance of life itself. And the longer a man resists, the harder it becomes to change. Because with every year that passes, the gap between potential and reality widens. The man who was once young and full of promise becomes the man who is middle-aged and full of regret. And one day he wakes up and realizes that all the things he was going to do, he never did. That the life he imagined for himself never happened. That he waited too long. But there is a way out. The mistake is believing that maturity is about abandoning youth. It is not. The answer is not to kill the Puer within you. The answer is to integrate him. To take his passion, his creativity, his sense of wonder and merge it with the discipline of the Senex. To take his dreams and turn them into reality, to embrace responsibility not as a burden but as the path to meaning. A man does not become whole by rejecting his past, he becomes whole by taking the best of it and building upon it. He does not become great by avoiding struggle but by confronting it, by using it as fuel for transformation. So the question is no longer whether you have Puer energy, because every man does. The question is what you are doing with it. Are you channeling it into something real? Or are you letting it keep you stuck? Are you waiting for life to happen to you? Or are you stepping into it fully, owning it, shaping it, living it? Because the difference between the man who remains a boy and the man who becomes something more is not talent. It is not intelligence. It is not luck. It is one thing. Choice. A man must choose to take the next step, not tomorrow, not someday, but now. So here is the challenge. Pick one area of your life where you have been avoiding responsibility. Identify the next action you must take, and then take it today, not later, not when you feel ready, because you will never feel ready. The Puer Aeternus will always whisper, "There's still time." But there isn't. The life you want does not exist in some distant future. It exists in the actions you take today. The man you want to become is not some ideal waiting to be found. He is built, one decision at a time. The only question left is this: will you remain a boy? Or will you finally become a man?